Feeding of catfish. Basically, to feed catfish after they've been stuffed, we start from juvenile. When we have our juvenile stocked in the fish, we want to have them grow at a very good rate. Our target is having them getting up to stable size between 3 and 4 months. For us to achieve that, we have to start by feeding them with 2 millimeter. Now, there are different kind of feeds, okay, depending on the cost. Now, we advise that we go with local feed because I've actually tried using both local and foreign feed. So in terms of the cost, especially if we are intending of making maximum profit, it's good to go with local feed because they will end up giving you the same result as the foreign feed. So our local feed has been made such that it can provide most of the things that are found in the foreign feed, and then they are usually at a very cheap rate compared to the imported feed. So it's better if you especially want to make profit. Now, I don't want to mention some feed to avoid advertisement. So we have some feed that are locally made, so you can just go to any fish feed mill where they sell the feed. You go there and then you request that you want local, so they will give you varieties of 2 feed. So if we start by feeding them 2 usually there are times at which you feed them that makes them to respond positively to the feed. Now, there are two different types of feed. You have the floating feed and then the sinking feed. Now, it's much more preferable to use the floating feed because the floating feed will help you to monitor their uptake of feed, how fast they take it, and then you'll be able to see if they are filled and they are satisfied because they will no longer come up for the feed by the time they are done with eating. So you have the floating feed and then you have the sinking feed. Now let me talk about the time of feeding. For juvenile, to raise them up to 3-4 months and then to get to table size of between 0.5 1 kg, some will even go beyond 1 kg if you feed them properly. The timing of feeding is very important. Now, you don't have to feed them 3 times 4 times in a day. 2 times is okay, in the morning and in the evening. Now, it's preferable to feed fishes when the temperature is getting to higher level in the morning. So I'm talking about having 9, 10 to feed them. Now, fish love a very warm weather before they can begin to eat. So when the temperature is getting to be high, that is the sun is coming out, the water is getting heated up, then you can go to your fish farm and then you feed the fishes. So then later in the evening, as the temperature also is cooling down, so fishes don't eat when the temperature is too hot or when the temperature is too cold. So the temperature must be absolutely regulated. So if you go to the fish pond and then in the afternoon, maybe around 1, 2, when the weather is, the temperature is extremely high, you just feed them, they will not eat the feed. So towards the cool of the evening, around 4, 5, 6, if you go to feed the fishes, they will respond positively to the feed. So number one, we talk about the timing. Feeding them twice daily is perfect for them all through. Now, by the time they get to 3 months, 3.5 months, you can feed them once a day. They are able to store food at this particular point in time. So when they get the food, they eat enough, they eat more than enough, and then they store. So if you don't feed them in the evening at that point, they will survive. So feeding them in the morning and feeding them in the evening. Now, also concerning feeding, I talked about the temperature. When fish are being fed, if there is 3, 4, 5 days consecutive rain and then the relative humidity is high, the atmospheric condition is very, very cold, fishes don't respond to feed. So feeding them like you've been regularly feeding them means that you end up wasting feed. And when feed is wasted, the water is contaminated and the fishes will not thrive well. So when the temperature is getting to be so cold, your fish will not eat well. So the best thing is reduce the feed. Take for instance, you have been feeding them with a cup of feed on daily basis, and then you discover that the temperature has been so low because of the rain. It has been raining for days consecutively. All you have to do is just reduce the cup to half cup. So you half the quantity and then you feed them. They will eat up that half and then they continue their lifestyle. So that's number one when we talk of feeding. Then the feeding time, and then there's the feeding style. Now basically there are two major types of feeding style, how you feed them. So we've talked about the time feeding style. There's what we call spot feeding, and then there's what we call broadcasting. And now, during the time I engaged in the fish farming, I employed both strategy. Both strategy works differently. Now, there are reasons for both strategy. Now, spot feeding, what we mean by spot feeding is you take your fish feed, for instance. Let's assume this is my fish feed, and then you take it, and I want to feed the fishes, and then I pour on a spot like this. I wait for the fishes to come and have their meal. That's what you call spot feeding. But when we talk of broadcasting, I spread my feed across the length and breadth of the pond. So I spread it such that all of the fishes have access to it. Now, both of these have its advantage and disadvantage. So now, when you talk of spot feeding, the purpose of spot feeding is to minimize food wastage. We don't want our feed to be wasted. So for us to do that, we have to be feeding them at a spot, waiting for all the fish to gather at that spot and then feed. So when the fish are satisfied, they will no longer come to that spot. They just eat, and then they are satisfied, they leave permanently. So one problem with that is, number one, it is time consuming, because you might end up staying up to an hour before the fishes will gather and then they eat. Of course, it's time consuming, but the fact that you can save feed wastage, you can prevent it, you are happy with that, so it's good. And then spot feeding also help in seeing the average sizes of the fishes, because by the time they all gather at a spot to feed, it will help the owner of the fish to see that, okay, this is the size of this is the size of it, okay, they are growing well, they are growing together. But another disadvantage about spot feeding is that some, like we know, all hands are not equal. There are some fishes that are naturally genetically stronger than the others, so they grow faster. We call them shooters or jumpers. They grow faster than others. Even though you got them at the same time, some of them will have a better genetic makeup, so they tend to pick up faster and grow faster. So such fishes, by the time they come to the spot to eat, and then there's another one beside them that is not so big, they end up cheating that one, eating more than enough. When they are satisfied, that's when they leave. So it's at the expense of the other one. In such a case, you might end up having to sort fishes because they may not grow up evenly. So you have some getting bigger than the others. But the other one is broadcasting. I will tell you about broadcasting and then how to use both. Broadcasting, generally you just come, you spread the the feed across the length and breadth of the pond. One thing about broadcasting is that, number one, it ensures that each of the individual fish in the pond have equal access to feed. So the fact that some are bigger, some are smaller, it doesn't affect. So everyone at their spot, they have access to the feed, they can eat comfortably, and then they can grow at their own pace. So there's no need for fighting for food because everyone have it at their own location. But the problem with it is that broadcasting can lead to food wastage. And then if the feed is wasting, then it might end up contaminating the water, and then there might be outbreak of disease, the oxygen level might be depleted. So both has its advantage and disadvantage. And another thing is that for broadcasting, it's not time consuming. You just come there, you spread the feed, and then you leave. But during the course of my own practice, and when I invested in it and then I did it, though I still intend to go into it because of time frame. Now, both are actually good and both should be employed at different time of growth of the fishes. Now, when the fishes, like we said in the last recording, the fishes have been put into the water, they are still young, they are juvenile. Now, they are bringing them from a different water body, they are familiar with that terrain, and now you are introducing them to a different body, a new environment. So such fishes, they do not know the terrain. Just like a normal human being, you move from one particular place, maybe you were living in Abuja in Nigeria, and then you move to another country, another part of Nigeria. You get to find time to familiarize yourself with the environment. So the same thing for fishes. So if fishes are stocked in a new pond, the number one thing is that they are getting used to the terrain. So spot feeding does not work for them, because if you want to start spot feeding them, it will be difficult for some fishes that are at the other edge, because they don't know the terrain. It will be difficult for them to come to that spot and feed because they are still young, they are juvenile. So the best thing to employ when the fishes are still in juvenile state, especially when you introduce them to the water body, the best thing to employ, the best feeding style is broadcasting. You broadcast such that every of them have equal access to the feed. So by the time they get to 1 month, they already, so you keep using broadcasting, you keep spreading the feed across the water body for a period of 1 month. Now during that period of 1 month, they would have started getting used to the environment because they've been moving up, down to get their feed, moving up, down. So by the 2nd month, you can start introducing spot feeding. So you are broadcasting and at the same time you are spot feeding. So if you want to feed them, you stay at a spot, you feed them at a spot. After you feed them at a spot and then you feel that they've all eaten, then you broadcast the rest. Then after that, by the 3rd month, you can still continually use both. But after the 3rd month, you can do spot feeding without broadcasting at all because they're already familiar with the terrain. So you just feed them at a spot, they all come, they gather. Even from 3 months, they would have started coming. After 2 months, the beginning of the 3rd month, they would have started coming to a particular spot, especially when they hear your voice or your foot sound. They know where to go to and where to eat. And it's good that during feeding of fishes, you get to, should we say, get them used to you coming. So some people, when they want to feed the fishes, they ring bells, some clap, some sing. So whatever you can do to every time you feed them. So for my own, when I go to my fish farm, I take my phone, I play music. So when the fishes hear music, they start moving that, oh, it's time for food, it's time for food. So whenever they hear music, they move. So some people ring bells and then to get them acclimatized. So it's good that you are consistent with the feeding time and with the feeding strategy so that the fishes will respond positively. Because if you feed them like 8 a.m. in the morning and then the next day you feed them 12, the following day 7 a.m., the next day 11, the time is inconsistent. So the fishes will not respond well. But when you've been feeding them, we said we should feed them around 10 when the temperature is high. So but if you say between 8 and 10, you're always feeding them. If you don't feed them 8 today, it will be 9, 10, 8, 9, 10, 8, 9, 10. The fishes will be acclimatized to that time. So they will come and then they eat at that time. So we've talked about feeding time. We've talked about the feeding style. Then let me talk about the fish feed size. Now, for the 1st month, we start with 2 mm for juvenile. So, like I said earlier, when the month is beginning, that's when you start counting. Now, before they get to that stage of juvenile, they must probably have spent about 3-4 weeks from the fish farm where you ordered the stock. So it's believed that they spent 1 month. So during that time, they were eating 1.8, 1.5, and then even in powdered form, that's what they were eating. By the time they get to your own farm at juvenile, they are considered that they are at their 2nd month. So at that 2nd month, though it with the fish farmer is the fish farmer's 1st month, but from the point of where you got the stock, they are already in the 2nd month. So but you is in the 1st month. But so because it's 2nd month, that's their total lifestyle, you start with 2 mm. So for that 2nd month, all through, you feed them with 2 mm. By the time you get to the 3rd month, okay, that 3rd month now, I'm counting from day 1 of archery. So that 3rd month, but with you, the farmer, is 2nd month. So for your 2nd month, you feed them with 3 mm. For the 3rd month, you feed them with 4 mm. That 3rd month is with you, but it's 4 months with the archer. So now, at 4 months, when they are taking the 4 mm, they're already in good condition to proceed to 6 mm. Our target is to harvest them after 4th month. So at that 4th month, we are feeding them with 6 mm. So when the fish are eating 6 mm at this point, they are already in good condition. By the end of the 4th month, they can be what? They can be sold comfortably because they would have reached table size. Some would have even go beyond table size as far as 1.5 kg, depending on the feeding intensity. If you follow the plan of spending about 150,000 to 200,000 for 500 juveniles, then by the 4th month, they would have reached table size. The minimum size would be about 0.5. So of all the fish, so some would have gotten 0.8 kg, 1 kg, 1.2, and you can end up getting as high as 1.5, depending on the water condition, the what's it called, the rate of inflow of water, the temperature of the water, then your stocking density. That's how big the pond is when they are being stocked. So those are the major things that need to be put in consideration when it comes to the feeding style, the feeding time, and then the feeding intensity, how much you feed them. So twice a day is good for feeding juveniles. So by the time they get to the 3rd month, you can start feeding them once in a day. They have the ability to now store feed.